As smartphone cameras get better and better, they eat away at the consumer camera market share once held exclusively by point-and-shoot and entry-level DSLR and mirrorless cameras. And Canon recently released the R10, an entry-level APS-C sensor mirrorless camera that costs $1,000 with a kit lens included, which is the same price you can buy a base model iPhone 14 Pro. And it's clear that Canon is aware of this price similarity because their advertisement of the R10 basically compares what the R10 can do to a smartphone. So I wanted to do a comparison of my own and give my thoughts on if a $1,000 mirrorless camera, specifically the R10, even though there's a host of other cameras we could include in this test, and stack it up to my iPhone 14 Pro Max. And I wanted to give you my real-world opinion on which I like to use in which scenarios, and then whether or not I think it's worth buying an entry-level mirrorless camera, or if you can get by just using your smartphone. So I've got over 20 different categories I'll be testing out, and I'm coming at this from more of a consumer perspective, not a professional perspective, because most people considering these two options aren't looking to make feature films or high-end commercial work, but rather home videos, document vacations, start YouTube channels, and maybe beginner-level videography. So let's start with what I think is the most important category, and that is convenience of use. I believe that the best camera is the one that you have with you, and since I almost always have my iPhone in my pocket, this makes it the best camera that I can use in 90% of my life situations. So this is a smartphone's biggest selling point on why it's a superior choice, is how convenient it is to carry around, quickly pull out, and begin recording. And the reason you always have a smartphone with you is because of our second category, and that is smart features. Your phone can make calls, send texts, browse the internet, play games, use apps like Instagram, TikTok, and even if a mirrorless camera took the same slim form factor as a smartphone, unless it had the smartphone's capabilities, you probably still wouldn't want to carry around with you all day in your pocket unless it provided other functions besides photos and videos. So this is another strong argument for why smartphones may kill off the entry-level camera market. If the smartphone camera quality gets too similar, everyone will prefer to use the camera that's already attached to their phone. So the question is, how similar is the quality? First, let's talk about 4K video. Overall, the quality of the 4K video that you'll get out of the APS-C sensor camera like the R10 is going to be superior to the 4K video that's coming out of your iPhone simply due to the size of the sensor. The iPhone 14 Pro sensor is a 1/1.28 inch sensor, or slightly smaller than a 1 inch sensor, which is what you'll find in a point and shoot like the Sony ZV-1. The R10, on the other hand, has an APS-C sensor, which is about 4 times larger than the iPhone's main camera sensor, and even though they have the same number of pixels, the pixels of the R10 are 4 times larger, resulting in a less compressed looking image, which may not be super noticeable if you're just viewing on your phone, but if you're watching on a TV or full screen on a computer, you'll see the image start to fall apart on the more compressed iPhone 4K footage. Another con of the iPhone 4K is that its videos are over-sharpened with no way to turn the sharpening down in the native camera app. This gives the footage a digital plasticky look versus the R10 image looks more filmic with a softer quality to it. You still have the option to sharpen it as much as the iPhone footage, but personally the digital over-sharpening is a con in my book, though it does make the iPhone look sharper because it's too sharp, but I do think it's an inferior looking 4K image. Speaking of 4K quality, this video is sponsored by Storyblocks. They are my go-to site that I've been using for years now. Anytime I need a stock footage clip to use as B-roll for my tutorials or a client project, I can always find what I need at Storyblocks, as they have over 1 million 4K and HD royalty-free video clips to choose from and are regularly adding more based on in-demand keywords. You also get unlimited downloads and simple licensing without any extra fees with their flexible subscriptions. I also frequently use their pre-made motion graphic templates to increase the production quality of my videos and streamline my creative process with minimal time and effort. As a longtime subscriber, I can highly recommend their service, and you can learn more by clicking the link in the description below or go to storyblocks.com/Parker. But coming back to our next category is low light performance. And on this one, I was actually shocked by the results. I thought the R10 would win across the board due to its larger sensor size, but the iPhone's main camera stacked up to the R10 with a kit lens at its lowest 4.5 aperture and ISO 6400 wasn't even close. The iPhone looks way better. Now this is mostly a knock on the kit lens, so I put a 16mm prime at 2.8 aperture, and this one was closer, but I still give the edge to the iPhone. Then I compared compared the iPhone's telephoto camera to the R10 with a 50mm at 1.8 aperture, and finally, you can now see the difference that a good lens makes as the R10 now looks way better. So the R10 has much more potential for good low light performance with the right lenses, but if you're just using the kit lens, which is what this comparison is based off of price-wise, then the iPhone dominates in low light. And this brings me to our next category, and that is lens options. The main camera of the iPhone 14 Pro and the widest the R10's kit lens can go at 18mm are about the same field of view, and the telephoto lens on the iPhone is about the same field of view as the kit lens zoomed all the way into 45mm, so they each cover both of those focal lengths, but the iPhone has a super wide angle lens option that the kit lens doesn't, so the iPhone actually has more field of view options if you're just comparing the R10's kit lens, but the R10 obviously allows you to buy more lenses, giving you dozens of lens options, but that of course comes at a greater cost. But this brings me to my main conclusion in this comparison, and that is, if we're just comparing straight up iPhone with an R10 with kit lens, I choose iPhone 9 out of 10 times because the quality difference isn't going to be enough to make up for the convenience of using your iPhone. So anyone considering buying an entry-level camera, understand this. The lens is just as important as the camera body. If you want to produce an image superior to a smartphone, the R10 has the potential to look way better, but you're going to need to spend more money on good lenses. For example, you could buy an 18 to 150mm and suddenly you have much better zoom range that will destroy the iPhone in shooting action sports. Or you can pick up a 50mm 1.8 lens for $150 and suddenly shoot in much lower light and get much better background blur, which is our next category. Here's a look at a side-by-side of the iPhone's main camera versus the R10 with the kit lens at its lowest aperture. A kit lens isn't actually going to produce great bokeh, so you notice there's not a huge difference. The R10 with kit lens does give you a slight edge over the iPhone with slightly more background blur, but again, if you use a much better lens, here's the 50mm at 1.8 versus the iPhone's telephoto lens, and you can see how much more bokeh you get when you put a nice lens on there. So if you're gonna make YouTube videos, for example, where you're gonna be talking to the camera and you want that nice background blur, you could get a fake version of that with the iPhone's cinematic mode, but that tends to blur your ears and your hair and doesn't look very real. But true bokeh, true background blur, will only come with a dedicated camera with a lens that can stop down to low apertures. And on the topic of lenses, it's worth mentioning that iPhone lenses are lower quality, less optically sound glass, so your flaring elements will look less professional. Here's an example of looking directly into a light. With iPhones, you get this weird ghosting effect, versus the R10 with its kit lens, you get a much cleaner image. So another point here for the R10 for its higher quality lens flaring. But moving on to our next subject is slow motion. This one's a mixed bag. The iPhone can go slower at 240 frames per second versus 120 frames on the R10. However, quality is pretty bad on both for different reasons. The iPhone footage just falls apart, but the R10 footage looks really soft. Overall, the R10 slow-mo is more usable in my opinion, but this isn't a camera I would buy for its slow-mo capabilities. Then at 4K at 60 frames per second, the R10 can do this in cropped mode. I like the quality better at 4K 60 on the R10, but I hate the crop factor. If you want to use the whole sensor, you have to go down to 1080p, but then your image is a lot softer than the iPhone, but the iPhone is over sharpened. So I will generously award a point to the iPhone because it has technically better slow motion specs. Our next category was very noticeable on the slow-mo tests, and that is dynamic range. Canon's low-end cameras don't have very good dynamic range, and iPhones actually have software-enhanced dynamic range, so in most scenarios, you're going to be able to see better highlights and shadow detail with an iPhone. However, this pro for the iPhone is also at times its con, because the software-enhanced look of the HDR effect can make skin tones look unnatural and fake-looking, and there's no way to turn off this software feature, so yes, you'll have better perceived dynamic range on the iPhone, but it will look more fake and less natural than the R10. What about colors? The R10 does allow you to choose between a variety of picture profiles. It doesn't, however, allow for 10-bit log profiles. You'll have to step up to the R7 for those features, but Canon does offer great natural looking colors straight out of camera in their standard profiles, and the R10 also offers an HDR PQ setting that is 10-bit color depth, and I found you do actually get the best colors using this setting, so I used it a lot throughout these tests, but you can't use digital stabilization in this mode, so there's just a trade-off there. iPhones also provide great natural looking colors as well, and they also offer a 10-bit color depth option, but you have to shoot in ProRes, which are huge file sizes, and honestly, probably no one will ever do that because the iPhone storage will fill up in a week. so I don't consider that a real option. And throughout my tests, the iPhone colors looked better at times, and other times the R10 footage looked better. But overall, I do think the iPhone's gonna give you better colors straight out of camera. But that's also a con because the R10 gives you the option to shoot in HDR-PQ, which will respond much better to color grading in post, as there's less of a baked-in look in the image. So point to the iPhone for better looking straight out of camera colors, but point to the R10 for giving you more flexibility in post to create your own look with color grading. Another perk to having a dedicated camera is being able to remove the SD cards. If you shoot a lot on the iPhone, you'll quickly fill up your phone storage or the maximum amount of iCloud storage of 2 terabytes. Versus a dedicated camera, you have removable SD cards that you can swap quickly and also quickly format. This is one of my biggest pain points when working with smartphone footage is dealing with storage space, so big point here for the R10. Moving on now to autofocus. The iPhones are incredible with autofocus, partially because the sensors are so small, so more is in focus, but it's also very intuitive at knowing what to focus on and rarely hunts for focus. The R10 also has incredible dual pixel autofocus, but as far as ease of use, the iPhone is probably a little more beginner friendly and going to nail focus more often. Also, specifically with the kit lens, the R10 does worse in low light. So in those situations, it hunts for focus more than the iPhone. So point here to the iPhone for more reliable autofocus. Next, we have image stabilization, and this one isn't even close. Again, the smaller sensor is actually a pro in this category. It's easier to stabilize a smaller sensor, and it shows. The iPhone has one of the best in-body image stabilization systems out of any camera I've used. It basically looks like a gimbal, whereas the R10 doesn't have in-body stabilization, just digital stabilization, which isn't great. So iPhone easily takes the cake in this category, and I think this is an area where entry-level cameras are going to have to really step up their game if they want consumers to choose their cameras over smartphones for everyday handheld home videos. They can't be reserving in-body stabilization for higher-end cameras. It needs to come standard in all of their bodies and needs to improve to get closer to the iPhone status. So this category alone is a huge reason to use your iPhone for documenting your family, vlogging, etc. Now, in that stabilization test, I also had both cameras on auto exposure to see which one does better, since a lot of home videos are easier to film to just pull out and shoot without having to manually adjust your exposure. And the iPhone does a great job with its auto exposure. It does, however, tend to be a tad overexposed, which some may like the brighter look of the image, but I almost always bring my highlights down a tad in post with my iPhone footage. I also shot this clip in auto white balance to see which can guess the color balance the best, and the iPhone seems to guess color temperature more accurately more often than the R10. As you can see, the white walls look more white with the iPhone footage and are a bit too warm on the R10, so I'd have to do more color correcting in post with the R10. However, the iPhone does hunt for color temperature more than the R10, and this is one of my biggest gripes with the iPhone, is it does a good job at initially capturing white balance, but there's no way to lock it in once it's found that good temperature. And this brings us to our next category, and that is the ability to have manual controls, which is where the R10 is really going to shine. Overall, the iPhone is going to be more reliable in auto modes, but it doesn't even give you an option for manual modes. Whereas one of the biggest perks of a dedicated video camera is your ability to set color balance, set your exposure exactly where you want it, choose the shutter speed for more natural looking motion blur, choosing the exact aperture you want for the amount of background blur you want. This, of course, is going to require some skill on how to correctly use all of those manual settings. And to learn those basics, we have a $27 mini course that you can check out, link in the description. But this is a huge reason to have a dedicated camera, is when you start branching out from home videos and want to have full control over your image and make it look more filmic, the iPhone doesn't have much to offer in their native app. Next, let's look at the sound quality. Now again, if we're comparing just the iPhone microphone versus the built-in microphone on the R10, the iPhone is going to sound slightly better in my opinion, but the R10 comes with a microphone jack because they expect you to buy external microphones. And the best bang for buck microphone I'd recommend for beginners is the Rode VideoMic Go 2 that you can pick up for $80. And when you throw that on top of the R10, your audio is going to be superior to the iPhone. Check it out. All right, this is what the audio sounds like on the R10 with the VideoMic Go 2 on top. And now you're hearing the internal microphone on the R10's camera. And now you are hearing the audio coming from the iPhone 14 Pro VideoMic Go 2 internal microphone, iPhone 14 Pro. And it is true that you can plug in microphones to the iPhone as well. However, again, the native camera app isn't going to allow you to adjust the gain levels to reduce the noise floor unless you have a nicer microphone setup like the DJI Lav mic system, for example, that allows you to adjust gain levels on the microphone itself. Check one, 2, 3, 4. Otherwise, even if you plug in a microphone to the iPhone, it's not going to sound as good if you plugged in a microphone into the R10, where you're able to manually adjust the gain. Let's now shift over to photo capabilities. Now, I'm a video first guy, but I take plenty of photos of my kids, so how do they compare with photos? As far as megapixel count, technically the iPhone wins at 48 megapixels versus 24 megapixels. However, again, size of pixel matters here, and the 48 megapixels on the iPhone is really a 12 megapixel sensor with each megapixel broken up into 4 tiny pixels. Also, the 48 megapixel RAW files of the iPhone are 70 megabytes versus only 24 megabytes on the R10, so you're taking up 3 times more storage space to be able to shoot those RAW photos. So if you don't want massive file sizes and you turn off the RAW 48 megapixel mode and just use the default 12 megapixel mode, the R10 image destroys it. If you do use the 48 megapixel RAW mode, they actually stack up pretty well. If you pixel peep though, you can still see the iPhone has some artifacting due to its smaller pixels, so the image breaks apart more quickly. So overall, better photo quality, even with a kit lens coming from the R10. Also keep in mind that when using the RAW setting on the iPhone, it takes much longer to buffer, so you can only take 1 photo per second versus the R10 allows you to take 15 RAW photos per second mechanically and 23 RAW photos per second electronically, up to a 29 photo buffer. So if you do any kind of action photos of your kids playing sports or photographing wildlife, for example, this is leagues ahead of the iPhone, especially when coupled with a telephoto lens, so you can actually get closer up on those action shots. Next category is battery life. This is always a big pain point for me when shooting continuously on the iPhone, is it's going to last only a couple hours and the screen will dim a few minutes in if you're shooting outside in sunlight, so you can hardly see the screen and the battery gets sucked up super quick. Whereas the R10, you have interchangeable batteries, so you could bring a handful and shoot all day long. However, the battery life itself on just one battery is really bad at just 75 minutes of continuous 4K shooting. For comparison, LPE6 batteries in my R7 shooting 4K continuous video lasts 160 minutes, so over 2 times longer than the R10 batteries. So because the R10 battery life is so bad, I'm not even going to give it a point, but technically the R10 probably still is your better option, assuming you have multiple batteries. Next category is weather sealing. The iPhone is water resistant for long periods of time, so I've done underwater shots of my kids swimming, versus the R10 isn't even weather sealed, so if it's a rainy day, you probably shouldn't even take out the camera. And our last category is the screen. The iPhone has a much larger screen, making it much easier to see what you're filming. However, like I mentioned, filming outside in the sun, the screen dims after just a few minutes, making it really hard to see anything. The R10, on the other hand, comes with a smaller 3-inch LCD screen, but it will retain its brightness and not overheat like the iPhone. Also, big perk here for the R10 is the fully articulating flip-out screen. This is a big one for vloggers or selfie photos. Of course, the iPhone also sports a front-facing selfie camera, but it's going to be much lower quality than its main camera. Overall, the flip out screen that doesn't dim after a while, in my opinion, gives the R10 the advantage here. So there you have my thoughts on all the categories that I think are important to me in a camera system. There's obviously tons of other things we could talk about. These are just the ones that are most important to me. And overall, as you can see, they're pretty evenly split, each shining in different categories, so it just depends on which one's way heavier for you. So here's my overall recommendation. For home videos, I just can't see myself carrying around a dedicated camera all day. I'll use my iPhone all day long. For vacations, I actually do both here. I probably do half on my iPhone, and then for those special moments or specific times in the day, I'll bust out a dedicated camera to capture those moments in better quality. For YouTubing, I've made several YouTube videos on my iPhone, and it's super frustrating to battle the auto settings, and therefore I spend more time in post correcting exposure and color, so I think dedicated cameras are always the better option for YouTube videos or tutorial videos. For entry-level videography or photography, I don't think smartphones are professional enough yet, maybe in a few years with larger sensors and more manual controls. But for now, if you're looking to get into professional video or photography, smartphones are a great place to practice, but you'll eventually want to invest in a dedicated camera if you expect to grow a business. So it really just comes down to the use case as to which of these camera systems I'd choose to bust out. They will each just shine in different different situations. As far as my overall thoughts on the R10, I think it should be priced a tad lower, maybe around $600 or $700, because the true value comes when you buy nicer lenses to go with it, an external microphone, extra batteries, multiple SD cards, and some kind of tripod or stabilizer. But if you're planning on using this camera just with the kit lens, I don't think it's that much better than the iPhone in enough categories. Personally though, I think the R7 is a big step up from the R10 with the uncropped 4K 60, the 10-bit C-Log recording options, much better battery life, in-body image stabilization. So overall, it's a much more professional camera for an extra $500 or so. So my recommendation would be to go straight to the R7 and skip the R10, but obviously if you can't afford the extra $500, then the R10 is a great starter camera. Just don't depend on the kit lens. But that's all I got. Let me know your thoughts below, and if you'd like to learn more about how to improve the quality of your videos, no matter what camera you're using, smartphone or entry level, the skills behind the camera will always be more important than the gear. So make sure to check out that $27 starter course that teaches you the basics of creating professional video content. Also, don't forget to subscribe for more content just like this. And if you have any further questions, please let me know.